Hey, good evening, guys. So I read the book Comeback Churches by Ed Stetzer and Mike Dodson. Ed Stetzer is a very prolific author on church mission and church life in general. And then Mike Dodson is a PhD student who lended his research to partner with Stetzer to come up with this book. It's on church revitalization. Here it is. As you can see at the top, highly recommended. It's a little gimmicky, and I'll explain that in a little bit, why Rick Warren is on the top. But yeah, my impression of the book is, first off, in the introduction, just starts really positively. The breadth of the research going into the book is really impressive. It goes over a dozen denominations. Hundreds of church leaders were surveyed for the book's research, so it was really well done. I thought the questions throughout the book were really well phrased. And so, what is the book addressing? The book is addressing really a discouraged church leader who might be in a declining or a plateauing church, and trying to encourage them to keep moving forward, though they might be frustrated or discouraged, and trying to convince them that church revitalization is possible in their church. So they come up with this proposal for what to do next to keep moving forward, how to become a comeback church. And so the church goes through different layers of how to address where growth might be stalled and how it might be best to move forward. One of the first things it does is really establish what a church is supposed to be doing in anyways, which is always important. We can kind of get lost in our mission, which is one of the reasons why churches were stalling for the most part. And so they address what a church is, and that's a spiritual church that is driven by the gospel, so to evangelize the world and share the gospel with them. And so it's a mission-oriented church, and a lot of churches are not that. They would rather maintain what they are, says Stetzer. So the first observation is that leaders lose their purpose. They lose that vision for what they're supposed to be doing. Secondly, these leaders have to communicate that vision to others. They cannot be only solely dependent upon their own work and their own energy and their own 24 hours in the day. They have to teach others to really take a hold of the vision for their church. This can be really difficult. It takes some trust from leaders to develop lay leadership. Next, they have to actually work with their leadership or work with their lay people to see if they're ready for leadership. So they cannot just assume that their faith is ready to take on this kind of responsibility. So Stetzer goes through a series of how to reinvigorate and build a trust in Christ, basically reinvigorating this discipleship in their lay people. And then because of this, Stetzer goes through not only how to cause a revitalization within the lay people, but then he also speaks of, just prior to this, about how to rebuild the actual faith of the pastor, that a lot of pastors don't take time to actually just pray for their churches. So there's a need for growth in the faith of both the lay people and the leaders of the church on staff. And then Stetzer, after that, they move on to some of the more practical things that people might think of about, okay, well, what do I actually need to do to help my church grow again? And so he goes through worship. There's clearly a bias towards contemporary worship, and that has to do, I think, with a lot of the denominations that he surveyed were much more prone to contemporary worship, but regardless, that was his findings, that comeback churches were more contemporary than traditional. He also talked about how the preaching that was adopted by comeback churches was verse-by-verse preaching, expositional preaching, much more than topical or thematic or narrative preaching. And so it's not by any means the sole answer to a church's woes to be expositional preaching and contemporary worship, but these were the far and away majority of churches that he saw that had come out of these plateaus and out of these declines. And so the next big part, obviously, is the outward reach of a church. And so he just talks about the doggedness of churches to go out and actually extend personal invitations to their newcomers and to their neighbors. And this takes a lot of obvious writing and redundancy, but it's important to hear, backed up by so many churches, that these are important, that personal invitations actually made a huge impact. 74% of comeback churches were ones that reached out personally to their neighbors. Another factor that Stetzer highlighted was facilities, and you would think that this is too shallow, perhaps, but 61.5% of comeback churches renovated their facilities, and say that had a huge impact in the way that they were able to reverse their church's growth or lack of growth. And then at the end, some of the real helpful things is they just summarize the book. Every chapter has a conclusion, but at the end they really did a good job at creating kind of a top 10 list for challenges and also top factors for what made a comeback church, or what inhibited the growth of a comeback church. And so overall, I felt like the book was really well researched. I think it could have been broader in their denominational reach, which maybe would have changed some of the profile for these comeback churches. But overall, I thought it was really good. I thought it was really helpful and practical. I think that Rick Warren was named, it was something like 90%, and everyone else had about 2% or less, as the most influential author to these comeback church leaders. So that's why I laughed at him being on the front. But yeah, I thought the book overall was a little bit limited, but very practical and very readable, and very encouraging to the reader, because every chapter, every section is just chock full of these examples of churches that have gone through these frustrations and needed encouragement like this along the way. So there it is, Stetzer Dodson, Comeback Churches.